Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Eat. I am excited to share today's episode and speak on it, expand on it, because it's really coming from my personal experience as I have navigated my own health journey, as I have read more and learned more and educated myself more and, worked with clients and so forth. I've really evolved and transformed, I would say, in terms of my own belief system around what is healthy. Now, I will disclaim and I will preface all this by saying that healthy looks different on everyone. And I think this is what makes it a little bit more complex and nuanced, and then ultimately, in some cases, overwhelming for people because of the fact that there is no one size fits all to our health. And I think we all strive to find what works for us, and that's super important, but it can also lead us down a variety of different pathways. And it doesn't help that the food industry and diet culture is the way that it is and are the way that they are. And that makes it obviously much more challenging. And so it really is so important that you're able to be flexible in this process and not feel like, well, it worked for this person, so it must work for me. I think not only are we biologically different and, it's going to impact what foods work for us versus what foods don't work for us, but also in terms of just how we structure our lifestyle. I work out in the morning versus someone who needs to work out in the afternoon, or I need 8 hours of sleep versus someone who might need 7 or 6.5. It's all very variable. And I think that is something that we don't recognize, and we kind of don't want to recognize as humans because we want to figure it out. We want to know, like, is this going to work for me or not? And so, we're not willing to kind of acknowledge the fluidity that must be there in order to find what works for each and every one of us. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind, but I also want you to reflect on your own journey, and maybe, some of these myth busting concepts will be relevant to you. Some of them may be new to you. Some of them may be something that you previously believed, and now through this episode, you're like, wow, wait a second, she has a point there, right? So, move into this episode with an open mind is what I'm going to say. There are hundreds of myths I could speak on here. I'm telling you, there are so many different topics I could go into, but I pulled from some of the ones that were most relevant for me in my journey, and I'm going to expand on that and what that looked like in my dietary choices and in my lifestyle. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, but I hope that you enjoy. Welcome to my table, and let's eat. Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, holistic health coach and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the exact location where optimal wellness lies. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, gut health, mental health, and more. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. So let's dive in. Let's get right into it. The first myth that I really want to deconstruct and to share a little bit more on is this concept that calories are everything. Now, there were days, months, weeks, years of my life that MyFitnessPal, and there was another app, I forget what it was called, maybe called Lose It, I think it was called. I think the actual app icon was a scale. I don't know if anyone remembers this. If it still exists, I don't know. There was a time where calories were everything. I didn't care about macronutrients. I certainly did not care about micronutrition. All I was worried about was my calorie intake and actually more specifically, my calorie burn. And this is problematic for a number of reasons. Now, I'll speak from personal experience that I was hyper-focused on calories and really did not pay any attention to anything else about food. And I think when we become so fixated On the calorie count versus the actual nutrition coming from food, we completely lose touch with our commitment to becoming healthier. Now, I don't want to say that a calories in, calories out mindset is problematic. I think that, that is a worthy approach to losing weight. But what I do find to be problematic about this is we lose touch with prioritizing our health as a result of it. Our focus becomes engrossed with how many calories am I eating and how many calories am I burning, and then everything else simply becomes irrelevant. Now, I'm not saying that this is all cases. I'm not saying this is every single person, but when we become hyper focused on the number on the scale or on a weight loss goal, it can sometimes cause us to forget how important it is for us to also simultaneously be healthy. So weight loss and health are not synonymous, right? They don't necessarily mean the same thing, which I think a lot of times we assume that that's the case, right? If I'm losing weight, I'm becoming healthier. That can be the case because we know that obesity correlates with lots of chronic illness, lots of, issues underneath the surface, metabolic dysfunction, and so forth. But it's not a determinant necessarily of health, right? Like losing weight does not necessarily mean you're suddenly going to become healthy. I think there can be problems, especially the route that you decide to take in order to lose weight. I hope that you're following me here. So when I say this, we can lose weight in a very worthy way, right? Maybe lose a couple pounds every week, consistent movement, eating whole real foods, prioritizing our protein, addressing any kind of underlying dysfunction that might be promoting weight loss resistance, right? There's a lot of different tactics that you can employ in order to lose weight in a healthful way. I think most often because of our lack of patience and our eagerness and our wanting to see results quickly, we resort to more intensive measures where we're more restrictive or we're doing more intensive exercise. And I think that is when the calorie piece comes in, where we're really holding on to how many calories am I eating. Oh my goodness. Did you hear that? We were in the midst of a thunderstorm and it was just the loudest thunder. I just listened back and you can definitely hear that in my clip. So we're just going to leave it. It's a beautiful interruption by nature. Anyways, we cling to and kind of strangle this concept of how many calories am I eating? How many calories am I burning? And I think, we lose touch with what food really is. And food is fuel. And so that kind of leads me to my next point around this concept, right? My first point is when we're fixated on calories, in order to lose weight, a lot of times that can result in poor health because of the fact that we are only focused on this caloric burn and we're not focused on prioritizing our health alongside it. And so what can evolve from this is potentially a toxic relationship with food, a toxic relationship with exercise. And this can potentially inhibit our progress, but it can also make it more challenging for us to sustain the weight loss because it's just not something that we can continue for the long term. We can't continue to treat our bodies this way. We can't continue to put our bodies in this space of stress by burning all these calories and hitting the gym hard and only eating low calorie foods and whatnot. It's just not a sustainable way to live. So that's essentially the essence that I want to convey around this initial point within this concept. Another concept I think is important to consider is, like I said in the beginning, is we're so fixated on the calories that we're distracted by it and we're not focused on the macronutrition or the micronutrition that food can offer. This is so important for me as a coach, but also in retrospect over the course of my journey, in the sense that we are simply not educated enough about food and food composition and what it means to properly fuel our bodies. And this is largely left out of any diet program, of any health class. And I think that this is a big missing piece to our understanding of health and to even a weight loss journey, because we look at food without any really understanding about what it's bringing our body and the value. And I think once we start to really educate ourselves and understand the value in some of these nutrient dense foods that are, so important for us to be consuming for the sake of our body's ability to function properly, we generate a whole new level of appreciation for these foods. And as someone who went through a phase in life, or I would argue this is, several years of my health journey where I had no real understanding of the nutrition behind food. And once I started to understand the difference between what ultra processed foods, or even foods that were labeled low calorie or packaged foods or whatever the case is, when I started to really understand the difference in nutrition between ultra processed foods, and then real whole foods, it opened up a whole new door of understanding of what authority I had in my health that I didn't realize I had before. And that is by choosing real whole foods, you are consuming a large amount of high quality nutrition that's going to give the body what it needs to do its job, and then feeling better can follow. Symptom reduction can follow. So while we step out of this narrow view of food, right, when we focus specifically on calories, we lose sight of really the true beauty that food is, because it's so much more than just calories. Food is abundant in nutrition and antioxidants and macronutrients, right, that give our body the resources that it needs to do its job, to allow us to feel good, to energize us, to heal. And when we're able to step outside of this calorie-focused mentality, like I said before, there's a level of appreciation that can come. And I think you can better understand why it's important for us as human beings to consume these foods, because you realize, well, without these resources, without this nutrition, my body simply cannot do its job. And we see that play out in the fact that the standard American diet is largely devoid of this nutrition. The processed foods that we're eating does not have the nutrition that we need to function. We're severely deficient. We're severely under-consuming what's necessary, and we see that play out in dysfunction and imbalance and disease. So my suggestion for you here as it relates to this facet of this calories are everything myth is to start reflecting on how you're eating, what you're eating, and consider the fact that while a food might be considered low calorie, or maybe a food might be considered a higher calorie food, start to maybe step away from that focus and start to consider what it's bringing your body or what it's not bringing your body. I think something else that's problematic here is a lot of high calorie foods are actually very nutritious for us. And this is typically in the realm of high fat foods, because typically, calorically speaking, they are higher in calories. So this is like your avocado or your coconut oil or your, EVOO, or things of that nature that are inherently higher in calories, but are also tremendously medicinal and nutrient dense for your body. Our body needs fat. This whole low fat movement is really problematic. It's about the type of fat that you're eating. It's not all fats. They're not all inherently bad for us. 60% of our brain is fat. Our gut needs fat. Our body needs fat. So just consider that too, that, this hyperfixation on calories will steer us away from foods that are otherwise very nutrient dense. Now, it's not to say that we should be, having 10 avocados a day. I think everything in balance, everything in moderation. But to avoid avocados for the sake of its fat content, from a caloric perspective, you're missing out on a whole host of vital nutrition that really would benefit you and support your body. But if we're still focused on the calorie perspective, it's not, we're not going to see that, right? We're going to look past that, or we're not going to even see, we won't even look past it. We don't even know that it's there, right? We don't even realize that that's important. So I really want to shed light on how important it is for us to not necessarily completely abandon ship on calories. I don't want to say that it's not an important metric, because in some cases it is. But I think we as a culture, collectively, we've become so fixated on our calorie count, and we aren't focused on what really matters when it comes to food, and that's the fuel that it's bringing us. I think generally speaking too, and I'll speak from experience, but also what I know about women is so many of us are under eating as a result of this caloric fixation, and we're just not giving our body what it needs. We're focused on portion control. We're focused on, I don't want to overeat for fear of gaining weight, or I have to, eat less in order to lose weight. And I think it's really just about what it is that we're eating. Because if we're focused on the calories, which most of us are, we're allowing ourselves to eat anything, really, anything packaged, anything processed. And as long as we're hitting that calorie goal, that's all that matters. But in reality, we're just not eating enough real whole foods. And I think this ties into my original point, when we kind of excuse the nutrition aspect of it and we focus on the calories, that opens the floor to all foods, no matter what, as long as they hit a certain calorie mark. I remember, the food that my mom would bring into my house, not obviously for the sake of calories per se, but, these little snack packs that would say, 100 calories of this or 250 calories of that. It would still be a processed food, but as long as the calorie count was labeled there, it was something that, most people would probably say, yeah, this works because it fits into my calorie count. But the difference between 250 calories, in terms of 250 calories worth of a avocado versus 250 calories of a can of Coca-Cola, there's a big difference there, right? I went over this, I use that example because I went over this with a client in therapy, and we spent probably 25 minutes talking about this because I had to really kind of, emphasize this message that I'm trying to share with you that, yes, you could argue that calorically speaking, 250 calories between those two foods, and I'm using the word food to describe Coca-Cola very lightly. You could argue that those, because they're calorically the same, right, that they can fit into someone's caloric deficit or caloric plan. But if you look at it compositionally, wildly different, and giving the body such different, I can't even use the word nutrition here, because obviously the avocado is giving us nutrition, but what is the Coca-Cola giving us? It's not giving us much, aside from a glucose spike. So this is something that I really want you to consider. I kind of went through subcategories of this idea that calories are everything, but it's more just the intention to really expand your view on nutrition and to start educating yourself on the value and looking deeper at food and what it's bringing us, because I think you'll be, number one, more successful in your weight loss journey. I think you'll be more successful in your wellness journey, but it's also just, it's an outdated concept. I don't know if it even was ever relevant. I don't want to even give it credit for being relevant. I think it just was something that we kind of became hung up on in the weight loss world. And now diet culture uses it and the food industry uses it, and we're completely blinded in terms of what food's actually doing for us versus what it's not. So first and foremost, the first myth that I am debunking is this concept that calories are everything. Look beyond that. Food is so much more. Food is fuel. And like I said, you'll be more successful across the board if you start to look at it that way. This next one is so relevant to my journey. Let me tell you, it is so relevant. So I'm speaking from the heart here because your girl spent many years and almost embarrassingly a lot of time focused on living this dairy-free lifestyle, which in retrospect, your girl was not doing anything for her body as a result of it. Okay, so this next myth is specifically, I want to focus on this idea of dairy-free, but I guess that this could also infiltrate this concept of veganism or gluten-free, and it's really this kind of diet alternative mindset as being healthier than the actual food itself. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that for some, dairy-free is the way. I'm not going to sit here and say that for a lot of people, gluten-free is the way, whether or not you're celiacs or not. I think most health experts would suggest that gluten-free is just a better route to take, given we know that gluten has an impact on our gut. So I don't want to get into the ins and outs of specifics as to what works for some versus what works for others. However, what I do want to expose is my personal journey going dairy-free And then what I've learned now as a coach over the course of the past several years is the fact that the food industry uses dairy-free, gluten-free, vegan, and catchy words like this to attract consumers. Because nowadays, we are very quick to equate dairy-free with healthy. We're very quick to equate gluten-free with healthy. And because of this, we are choosing foods that are largely compositionally unhealthy, given the fact that they're loaded with all sorts of crazy ingredients. But because they're labeled dairy-free or because they're labeled gluten-free, we grab them, we run with them, and we use them regularly. Now, this is the issue I think that I encountered when I first started navigating a dairy-free lifestyle. Was I was reaching for the dairy-free creamers, the dairy-free milks, the dairy-free yogurts, all these dairy-free options as a way to avoid dairy, really for no reason aside from I think I just didn't find any attraction to dairy, first and foremost. And I think I got caught up in the new dairy-free is healthier mentality where I thought that that was what I needed to do. Now, like I said before, there are times and places that I think that people should be going dairy-free, especially when they're trying to work on their gut. A lot of times it takes a gut healing journey to then turn around and try dairy again and realize, all right, I was just having some issues with my gut, and now I've done X, Y, and Z, and my body can tolerate dairy. More specifically, higher quality dairy, which is always my priority. But at the time, I thought that eating dairy-free foods was the better, more healthful option. Now, if we look at a lot of these options that are out there, especially just within the past 5 years, it's amazing how much has evolved and how much of this industry has grown, because the food industry is seeing such a rise in popularity around dairy-free diets, gluten-free diets, and so forth. So they're hopping on that bandwagon to be part of, the ones who benefit from it, right? And I think what is harmful about this is now we've just lost touch with what it means to live dairy-free, what it means to live gluten-free in a way that's still healthy. Because you can be dairy-free, you can be gluten-free, you can be vegan, you can be all of these things, and you can be really unhealthy just based on the foods that you're eating. Now, we know real whole foods, aside from choosing dairy products, are inherently going to always be the best choice. They're always going to be the best choice. That's always going to be something that I recommend. It's these products that we find on the shelves that we get confused with being healthful because oftentimes, the food industry uses what we call a health halo to confuse us. They use this kind of psychological strategy to greenwash essentially their products and make it seem like this is something that is good for me, right? And we know that this is simply not the case. And this goes for any product outside of dairy-free, gluten-free, and so forth. I mean, there's lots of terms people use: antibiotic-free, natural, made with real ingredients, no sugar added. I mean, so much of this language is used for us to feel as though we're getting a healthy option. And so when it comes to dairy-free, I was buying, as I mentioned, all of these products without really paying too much attention to what the ingredients look like. And oftentimes what we're seeing in these dairy-free products are a lot of fillers in order to make up for the fact that they're trying to replicate a product that's meant to be dairy that's not dairy. So you'll see gums, you'll see oils, you'll see thickeners and additives, preservatives, sweeteners. You'll see all sorts of different ingredients on a dairy-free creamer, let's say. I think the worst offender that was really exposed over the past couple years is Oatly. I used to use Oatly, this is probably 5 years ago, and then I stopped using it because I really obviously became better educated and understood what this actually was. But, these non-dairy options are coming across to the general population as being a healthy alternative, when in reality, you look at the back of an organic grass-fed half and half, and you see organic cream and you see organic milk, 2 ingredients. Look at the back of a Beyond Burger. You have a laundry list of ingredients. Look on the back of grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef. You have grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef. One ingredient. One ingredient. Now with gluten, I think it's a little bit of a different story, I guess, because products can be labeled gluten-free for the sake of the fact that they are certified gluten-free. They don't have gluten in them. Does it make it a more healthful product? No, it doesn't. It just says that it's gluten-free. And so it doesn't mean that it's not without sugar. It doesn't mean that it's not without other processed ingredients. It just says it's gluten-free. And that really doesn't tell us this is a healthful product. It's just simply gluten-free. I mean, a lot of products will say certified gluten-free or gluten-free when there was really never any gluten in it in the first place. It's not like it was like a product that wasn't gluten-free that now doesn't have gluten in it because of the way that they made it. It's just an actual product that is always considered gluten-free, but the food industry wants to utilize this perk of saying, well, this is gluten-free. It's like, well, no, it never had gluten in it. So it's you don't need to say that. Now, don't get me wrong. There are sometimes cross-contamination if they're, made in a facility that it contains gluten or whatever. Sometimes that obviously can influence this, right? But we're using this gluten-free trend as a reason to healthify these foods. And it's just not any better. It's just not any better for you. And I don't mean to necessarily blanket statement this because there are a lot of gluten-free products out there that I choose because I love them and I know that they're better for you. For example, Simple Mills. I have such a strong, deep love for Simple Mills, the brand. And they are a gluten-free product that I endorse, that I support, because you can look at the ingredients and you recognize all the names, compositionally, it's a high quality product. So that would be something that I would say, yes, absolutely. Love that. That's a great option. And it is advertised as being a gluten-free option because it is in fact gluten-free. But this is just not the case with all products that are out there. So you really have to sharpen your skill set in navigating the grocery store in a way for you to actually turn the product around and look at the ingredient formulation, because that's where the most important information lies, is in the ingredient label. And what the ingredients are, that should be the driving force in terms of making your choice as to whether or not you're going to purchase this item or not. If you are someone who chooses dairy-free options over whole milk dairy options, and you don't really have a reason as to why you do that, I would encourage you to consider trying a high quality dairy instead of some of these dairy-free options. Now, like I've said, it's not to say that there's not dairy-free high quality options out there. As far as non-dairy milks go, Malk, great option. Elmhurst, great option. Three Trees, great option. Love these options. And these are the brands I'm reaching for when I'm choosing a non-dairy milk or a non-dairy product, because I know that they're formulated well. But if you are not someone who has a sensitivity, or you're not someone who needs to necessarily avoid dairy for, whatever reason, or you just want to give it a go, I would encourage you to give it a try and see how it goes. Because ultimately, eating real whole foods, and I guess to some extent like an animal-based diet, I firmly believe that we can gain a lot of nutritional benefit, a lot of health benefits from eating these foods. I would not have said that 5 or 6 years ago. Full disclosure. I would have not said that. I would have said largely plant-based, try to do dairy-free if possible, red meat is maybe something we should avoid. I don't feel that way anymore. And for the record, I'm entitled to change my belief system, right? Especially because in the past 5 years, I am a completely different person and I've learned so much. So I think just as a disclaimer, you too can also change your belief system and how you approach your diet. That's allowed. And you're also allowed to choose the foods that you want to eat and eat the foods that you want to eat and all that, right? However, I would encourage you, if you are someone who gravitates towards foods that are dairy-free, gluten-free, whatever the case is, do your research and really understand what it is you're putting in your body. That is so important. And then also, if you're open, if you're willing, if you want to just give it a try some high-quality foods that are animal-based. I believe that there's so much nutrition that can come from these animal-based foods, higher quality animal-based foods, that we have completely just eliminated from our diets for whatever reason, because we saw that we should, or, because we're fearful of them, or whatever the case is, when in reality, this is just a byproduct of our culture doing what it does best, and that's instilling fear in us, and that's trying to tell us how to eat. And I think ultimately you have to find what works best for you. You have to find, the diet that vibes best with your body, and your body will do a really great job at letting you know when and if a food works or when and if a food does not work. So be open about that. Okay, the ultimate message here is to just be aware that not all dairy-free options are necessarily the healthier options, and really taking authority in your nutritional choices is one of the best things that you can do. Understand ingredient labels, read ingredient labels, and know what to look for when choosing these products, and sort through them with a little bit more intention for the sake of better health. So my last myth that I want to touch on today has to do with exercise. And this is something that was well embedded in my brain from as early as probably 14 or 15 up until maybe 21, 22. And that is cardio is most important. Cardio is the most important form of movement. It is what's going to generate the best results. It's what's going to make me feel my best. It's what's going to help my health the most. Blanket statement, period, end, done, hard stop, cardio. Now, what we know, and what I know now, I'll give it to you straight, is this is not the case. Okay? This is just not the case. And actually, doing too much cardio can be harmful to the body and really stressful on the body. And I had to learn that the hard way. Now, in retrospect, what I know to be true, both in terms of my personal experience, but from a health perspective, is the fact that we need a balanced assortment of movement to be optimally well. And this includes mobility and restorative work, like yoga or something like Pilates or stretching, a low impact form of movement, so something like cycling, walking. I mean, even cycling can be higher intensity. So I guess I'll lump that all together in the cardiovascular category. So running, cycling, swimming, all of that. And then resistance and strength training, which arguably I would say is the most important of the three. Now, I don't want to give anyone, the upper hand, but I think that really acknowledging, number one, we need to balance our relationship with movement as best as we can. And there's so much benefit to our health, both in the immediate term and long term, when we're focused on our strength capacity, our muscle mass, that we're simply not taught, especially as females in our society. When it comes to muscle mass and building muscle, this is one of the most important parts to longevity. It promotes insulin sensitivity. It supports a healthy, skeletal structure. The list goes on. There's so many benefits to developing, establishing muscle mass. And not only that, we lose muscle mass as we age. Starting at age 30, we lose a percentage of our muscle mass from decade to decade. This is a phenomenon called sarcopenia. So even further, time is against us, and we really need to be prioritizing this at all phases of life and all stages of life, but especially as we get older. It's one of the best anti-aging strategies. And Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, I'm not sure her exact words, but she speaks on protein and muscle mass and all that, as part of really her message to the world in terms of health. And she says something along the lines of, we are not an over-fat population, we're an under-muscled population. And I could not agree with that more, because muscle mass is so imperative, especially in the realm of weight loss. And unfortunately, we're just not taught that we need to be establishing that. I mean, just alone, we're too sedentary, right? I don't want to get ahead of myself and say, oh, well, people aren't building muscle either. No, people just aren't moving. I think that's a crisis we need to address before we get into the world of strength training, And so when it comes to muscle mass and muscle growth, I spent a lot of my life not realizing how important that was, and having this fear that I didn't want to get too bulky, or that, weight training and strength training was for men. And so I spent a lot of time putting my body through stressful, cardio-heavy workouts, running a lot. My joints are simply not as young as they once were. And I think this is a result of working on my feet, number one, but also running as much as I did, probably with not proper footwear and running too much and not stretching properly and all that. So I'm paying the price for that now. But what I think the most important, piece here is we are putting so much of an emphasis on cardio work, and we're missing so much of the well-roundedness that must be when it comes to our relationship with movement, and then the health benefits, both mental and physical, that can come by prioritizing a, healthy, balanced, well-diverse relationship with movement that includes all of the areas I had just mentioned, including rest days. We need ourselves rest days. So what I want you to consider is, how is this relevant? How have you maybe culturally been indoctrinated to follow essentially what I just was mentioning, that, cardio is such a hot topic and we feel like we need to be doing all this cardio, hours and hours and hours of cardio, when if you have a solid 45-minute, routine, you can be just as effective as even 35 minutes, 25 minutes. You can get an effective workout, right? Versus this mentality that says we should be spending hours on the treadmill or, hours on the elliptical, which, don't get me wrong, I've been there. I would spend X amount of minutes on the elliptical or on the treadmill in hopes of achieving some sort of, physique or, for my body to look a certain way. And I never actually got to where I wanted to be with those goals because I wasn't creating muscle mass, which is actually what's going to sustain the change versus just trying to lose fat, which I will also say, as someone who is 5'8" and has never really dealt with, I've had my periods of time where I have gained weight, but I've been very lucky that I'm not someone who gains weight and had any kind of overweight problem, which I know that's obviously a big issue, but I've just been someone who's been lucky that I haven't had to navigate that. Weight loss was never my priority. Weight loss was never my issue. And I think I was trying to achieve a certain body goal, and I really wasn't going about it in a way that made logical sense. I probably could have done a 10-15 minute warm up, but I probably should have followed that with some sort of strength training, weight training, and that should have been my focus all along. And I was just completely missing the point. I was missing missing what was actually going to be effective. So I think, my biggest encouragement for you is look at your relationship with movement. Now, if you don't have a relationship with movement at all and you're not moving, I would suggest just start moving, right? Find a modality that works for you. Don't feel like you have to go 0 to 100 and suddenly be lifting weights all the time and doing all of these exercises and whatnot. No, start small, meet yourself where you are and start there. But the end goal should be, I would like to have a well-balanced relationship with movement so that I'm being sure to prioritize all the areas that are important, that I know I will see results and sustain results, and that are actually best supportive of my health. That is really what I want you to take away here. So this concludes today's episode of myths that I strive to dismantle in the health and wellness space that I personally have encountered and confronted and worked through as I've navigated my own health journey. And now I can hopefully share with you my reflections on them and my insights that I've gained. And this is going to be an ongoing series because I think that there can be so many myths and concepts that drive our decisions in terms of health that really are not aligning with what is actually best for us. And so I want this to be open-ended as they come about so I can speak more on them. I was going to say, oh, this is part 1 of 2 or part 1 of 3, but I think that would be silly of me to try and give some sort of structure to this because I think it's just going to be an ongoing series where I showcase different myths that I know are relevant or that I've encountered, because I have plenty more that I can share, and I'm sure that there's going to be plenty more in the future around health. And hopefully, through these conversations, you will have a little bit of that demystified for yourself. Now, that's not to say that my perspective is the only perspective. There's probably a lot of people that will come for me in this episode about certain things that I've said around health, but it's just my belief system. It's just how I orient and what I know to be true. I think a lot of people would agree with me in a lot of what I said, but I think there's also a lot of people who would come for me, especially those who think that, animal-based eating is maybe not the best for us and our bodies. So I just want to put that out there that, Everyone's entitled to their own opinions and beliefs. These are just simply reflections that I've had over the course of my journey that I think might be valuable for you. And I hope that you take away some insight and maybe some things to think about. And I hope that you'll tune in next time. These will obviously be ongoing, so tune in for another part to this series around myths in wellness. And I thank you so much for being here. As always, it truly means the world to me, means everything to me that you tune in, that you listen, that I hope that you gain value from these conversations, these topics. If you ever have any requests, I don't know I say this enough, but if you have any requests, please let me know. Or if you have a personal myth that you're like, I learned this, I don't really know about this, what do you think? I'd be happy to give insights, give thoughts. Like I said, it's not, never one size fits all, but ultimately, the better we can familiarize ourselves with what works for us, we can listen to our bodies, the more successful we'll be along our wellness journey. Okay, so thank you so much for being here. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And in the meantime, be well.